Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Georgie Fleming, and I'm one of the Education and Media Technicians here at Caseware UK. Today, I'm joined by Les Horsley, one of the Education and Media Consultants, and during today's webinar, we will be looking at mapping in Charity and Academy AccountsAdvanced engagement files. Now, we're going to try something a little bit different today. You know, given the current circumstances and the position that we find ourselves in, I'm sure that most of us are working remotely. So in the chat field on the GoToWebinar panel, if you just want to pop your name in there, feel free. You don't have to, no obligation. If you just want to pop your name in there and sort of let us know where you are, and we'll feel less alone then. Right, okay, so before I hand over to Les, there are some housekeeping items we will run through. I have mentioned questions. Please type them into the questions field on the control panel of the GoToWebinar rather than using the hand raising feature. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and we will try and incorporate as many of your questions into that session as possible. We are recording this webinar today, and we will be publishing the recording on the knowledge base, and depending on how many questions we receive, we may also publish a Q&A doc. So before I hand over to Les today, another new thing we're doing today, I'm going to launch a poll on your screens. So I'm going to give you a few moments just to answer this poll. It's just to find out if you're currently using the AccountsAdvanced Charity and Academy template. So I'm going to launch that on your screens and give you a few moments to answer that for me. Okay, perfect. Thanks, guys. So I can see that 77% of you are currently using the template. We have got 15% of you that aren't, and the rest sort of plan to be using it in the future. Brilliant. Thank you. And I shall hand you over to Les.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, which is looking at mapping in our Charity and AccountsAdvanced template. As Georgie said, my name is Les Horsley, one of the Education and Media Consultants here at Caseware, and obviously I realise for many of us the circumstances are slightly unusual, perhaps a little bit difficult, so thank you ever so much for joining us today. We've only got 30 minutes, so we've actually got quite a lot to actually go through in that sort of 30 minutes, but hopefully you should be able to sort of see the agenda in front of you. And I've just got a few bullet points to actually go through. So I'm going to start off actually looking at what a set of charity and academy accounts actually look like to actually sort of see the specific disclosure requirements actually involved. So I suspect probably it might be sort of fairly sort of self-explanatory for many of you actually looking at this webinar. But the reason why the mapping structure is different in our charity and academy files is because of the actual disclosures you need to make in those set of financial statements. So we'll have a brief overview of a set of accounts for a charity to actually see what those elements actually are. Once we've done that, we can actually sort of dive in and actually look at the specifics of the mapping hierarchy. So I'm just going to start off when we do that by giving you a general overview of the mapping hierarchy, just how it actually looks at a top level. And then we can actually look at the more specific disclosures you need to make. So I'm going to start off by having a look at the balance sheet side of things and sort of the map numbers used when you're trying to identify the balance sheet disclosures in a set of charity file, which is probably a simpler one of the two, because after that we'll actually look at the income and expenditure side of things and how you can actually ensure the correct disclosures in your charity file in relation to income and expenditures. That is actually perhaps a little bit more convoluted. So you do actually have quite a lot to go through, so I'm not actually going to hang around. So I'm actually now going to move over and look at the first bullet point, actually look at a sample set of financial statements. I'm actually going to start off by having a look at a set of financial statements for a charity. So the charity I'm actually looking at today is obviously fictitious, but it's going to be a sort of charity set of accounts which we're going to have a look at in terms of producing that in Caseware. And you can see we have a PDF of those set of accounts. And obviously a set of financial statements, the broad hierarchy is going to be sort of similar no matter what type of organisation you're actually looking for. So in this case, if we look on the left-hand side and go to our income and expenditure statement, or say for the charity, much like any other organisation, your income and expenditure account will actually sort of like show your total income, netted off expenditure to actually give you this sort of surplus for the year. But in a SOFA for a charity and also for an academy, you can see I've tried to highlight it with different colours, as well as the total income, which is actually highlighted in that blue column. That income is actually broken down. So we actually have analysis of income and also expenditure by any unrestricted funds our charity might potentially have, and also, which is actually the yellow column, and also any restricted funds, income and expenditure, which is actually the green column in the middle. So you can see in our sort of SOFA income and expenditure statement for a charity, you have some additional disclosures. And similarly, if we scroll down, actually have a look at the balance sheet for this organisation. Balance sheet at a high level is similar to a balance sheet for any other type of organisation. So we, sorry, excuse me, I've just had a little cough. So we start off by looking at assets, either fixed assets or current assets at the top, netted off with your liabilities, either current or longer term liabilities, to actually give you a net financial position. But again, if we scroll down, this is where charity is slightly different. I've tried to highlight some of those differences. You can see if you look at the yellow row, we have our funds, which are restricted funds. So there's actually limitations on what our charity can actually do with them. But we also have rows explaining our unrestricted funds, and that's that row shown in green. So rather than actually have our share capital reserves, again, bottom of the balance sheet has a slightly different format. So as with any other set of financial statements, as well as those primary statements, we also have various different notes. And just to show you what those notes look like, if I go to my note on income from donations and legacies, you can see in much the same way as a SOFA, this note, you have a lot more information in it. So as far as having income from different types, if you look at the different rows, so income from donations and legacies and grants and so on, again, that income is broken down between restricted, unrestricted, and total funds. So that's the income and expenditure side of things. And if I just scroll down and go to the bottom half of my financial statements, and this time perhaps look at our statement of funds, again, I've highlighted it in yellow. You can see we have a breakdown of our sort of, specific fund balances. So in our case, if you look at the yellow row, we've got general fund number 1. And that note provides information on the actual balance brought forward, the income and expenditure going in and out of that fund, any other adjustments to actually give you the year-end position. So you can see there's lots of additional information in this set of accounts compared to what might be in, say, a set of accounts for a company. So we need to actually have a look at how the mapping actually deals with that. So to do that, I'm just going to go back to PowerPoint. And as I said, we're going to start off just looking at the balance sheet side of things. So a very basic introduction to mapping and charity file, if I can start off by looking at that. As many of you will know, if you have a trial balance and that trial balance has a list of account codes, those account codes need to have a map number assigned to them. And once a map number is assigned to them, then the account code appears in the correct part of the financial statements. And I expect many of you, if not all of you, actually know that how that operates in the Caseware file. Now, in terms of a charity or an academy file, as we saw, the balance sheet side of things, top half looks very much like any other organisation. So in terms of balance sheet mapping, if you have assets and liabilities, you'd be using map numbers starting with letters A all the way down to H to represent the actual assets and liabilities of a balance sheet. Now, as we saw earlier, on the bottom half of a balance sheet for a charity or an academy, as well as perhaps reserves and share capital, you also have different fund types. And so we do have the option to actually use JMap numbers, and those JMap numbers identify the various different funds a charity has on the bottom half of the balance sheet. Now, as well as that, we also have different map numbers on the income and expenditure side of things. And so principally, where you have income coming in, you'll be using K map numbers for your income coming in, and where you have expenditure actually going out, you'll be using Y map numbers. So you'll be using K and Y map numbers to identify the different types of income and expenditure in your charity. In addition to that, you also have the option to use NMap numbers if your organisation has perhaps sort of trading subsidiaries or trading activities to actually generate resources. So K and Y are going to be your income and expenditure map numbers, with the possibility of also using NMap numbers as well. And we'll be looking at those, highlighted those purple lines in a little bit more detail as we go through our webinar. As I said, I'm actually going to start off and actually focus on the balance sheet side of things first. So if we go to our next slide, I highlighted the fact that in terms of funds on the bottom half of the balance sheet, you'll be using JMap numbers against your account codes. You can see in terms of how JMap numbers work, in essence, we have J0, and J0 represent any restricted funds your organisation might actually have. And you can see here, if you look at the slide, we've got J01 to indicate any endowment funds, and also J02 and J03 to actually indicate any restricted funds. Now, the difference between J02 and J03 is, in terms of the use, is how many restricted funds your organisation might have. So I guess lots of smaller charities will actually have either none or perhaps a small number of restricted funds. So you'll be using sort of J02 map numbers for restricted funds. Larger organisations will have a significant number of restricted funds, and in those circumstances you can actually use J03 for restricted funds if you have more restricted funds than can be accommodated within the sort of J02 map numbers. So I say J charitable funds, J0 will be restricted funds, and it'd be either J1 all the way down to J3. Now, in terms of unrestricted funds, it's a similar principle. Unrestricted funds use a J1 map number, but there's two elements you can use. So if you've got J11, that will be any general funds your organisation might have. But some organisations, although they're unrestricted, might have specific earmarked funds, and we can use J12 for designated funds if your charity actually has them. So that's how the first element of mapping number actually works. As you might remember from this previous slide, we actually have 4 different elements. You can see I've highlighted in purple J01 endowment funds, and I'm just going to use that as an example and drill down. And if we go to the next level, we can see in this example where you have a different number of endowment funds, whilst J01 is a generic map description for endowment funds in total. For endowment fund number 1, you'll be using J0101, endowment fund number 2 will be J0102, and so on. And this also applies to all the other JMap numbers, how it works if we look at the second element of the mapping number, all the way up to J0149. Now I'm going to drill down again to actually explain how it works, and you will find in most situations in your Caseware file, that third element, as third pair of numbers, is always going to be sort of 0, 0. So you can just generally ignore the third element. But there are some specific circumstances where that third element is used. I don't think it's actually used that in the JMap number range, but just to flag up, if you look at the income and expenditure side of things, I mentioned why map numbers indicate expenditure. In certain circumstances, if your charity or your academy, and I guess this is actually also quite relevant to academies where you have lots of people in defined benefit schemes, you will find in certain circumstances, in academy files in particular, if you do have defined benefits pension schemes, you might be using those map numbers, that third element of the mapping structure. But as I said, generally speaking, it's going to be 0, 0 in most situations. Drill down again then, so we've got the fourth level, our final level, and you can see in this case, in terms of how the funds mapping range works, those JMap numbers, we've got 3 elements we can use in terms of the last pair of digits. If you have any funds brought forward, that last pair of digits will be 0, 1, and any transfers in or transfers out, you'll be using either 02 or 03 in terms of map numbers. So that's how the map numbers work in your JMap number ranges for your balance sheet side of things. In terms of how that actually feeds through to your financial statements, in my next slide, I've got an extract of one of the notes we actually looked at when we looked at our PDF just a few minutes ago. So you can see we've got an extract of our sort of statement of funds. Although the previous slides focused on the endowment map number ranges, in my case, I'm actually looking at our sort of general funds, and you can see we have a line there for general funds, and that line in the note just explains the actual movements in the year. In terms of how that actually is fed by the map numbers, we're looking at general funds number 1, that yellow line, and that general funds number 1, the balances are actually picked up from the map numbers which start with J11.01. So if you remember, J1 indicates we actually have a unrestricted fund balance. J11 indicates it's actually a general fund, and as we're looking at general fund number 1, it's actually going to have a map number with the second element, that second pair of numbers being 01. Now, in terms of the actual columns in this note, basically, as we saw in the slides, if it's J11.010001, we can see that represents a balance brought forward. Any transfers in, transfers out, the last pair of numbers will actually be 02 or 03. So you can see that that transfers in, out column is actually populated by those map numbers. Now, and I'm sure you're sort of thinking, there's actually other information in that sort of like note explaining income in and expenditure out. That isn't actually picked up by the map numbers. So in terms of income going into a fund and expenditure actually going out, the K and Y map numbers provide some information, but there's actually another document which needs to be completed to actually fully populate your financial statements. And that document's called the funds worksheet. And those figures there, those income, expenditure and gains and losses actually come from the funds worksheet document, which we don't really have time to actually go into today. But if you join us in a webinar in a few weeks time, a couple of weeks time, we'll actually explain how that funds worksheet actually operates. So that's how the map numbers work on the sort of balance sheet side of things. I'm just going to go to a Caseware file and just explain, or perhaps have a look at that, how that actually operates in a specific Caseware file. So I've gone to my Caseware file, and just to show how it actually operates, you can see one of the account codes I actually have in my trial balance in my Caseware file is this account code URF001, which is actually our general fund balance brought forward. And as you can see, we might recognise the figure. That balance brought forward is just over £22 million. If I go to my assign mapping screen, so if I go to account and assign mappings, just to explain how that's actually worked in terms of mapping in process, if we go to our JMap number ranges on the right hand side, we mentioned that that account code is actually part of our general funds, so we need to map it to the J11 section here, and if I expand it up, as I've said, it's actually general fund number 1. If I open up that J11.01 map number range and drill down, account code was actually representing our general fund balance brought forward. And so if you look at this map number here, J11.010001, you can see that our account code there has been mapped to that map number, which represents our general fund balances brought forward. And just to sort of see how it feeds through to your financial statements, if I go to my set of accounts and actually look at my sort of statement of funds, which we saw as a PDF earlier, you can see that that account code, the £22 million on it, has actually fed through to this statement of funds note. So that's how it actually operated in practice in terms of that specific account code and the JMap numbers. Now, going back to my PowerPoint slide, we can now just give you a little bit of an overview as to how things work on the income and expenditure side of things. But before I actually sort of show you in detail and actually sort of like describe it in detail, it's probably just worth actually sort of flagging up what needs to be disclosed in a set of charity or perhaps academy files. And in terms of income and expenditure, there's actually sort of quite a complex range of disclosure. So we need to describe income and expenditure, perhaps by type. So we might actually have, for example, income from donations and grants, and then similarly, expenditure might be specific type. It might be sort of things like rent and rate and stationery and so on. You might also need to provide analysis by sort of perhaps say direct and support costs. There's actually quite a lot of disclosures there. As well as that, if your charity or academy has multiple activities, you might need to provide an income and expenditure analysis by activity, and also as we saw in the PDF early on, you might also need to actually provide an analysis of income and expenditure by fund type. So there's quite a complex range of disclosures. To actually show what I mean, again, I'm just going to quickly go back to my PDF. So we did actually sort of see a couple of examples earlier on, but if I go back to my PDF, as I mentioned earlier, so if I show you this note number 3, we've got income from donations and legacies and sort of disclosure there. If I scroll down slightly, we've actually got note number 4. So this also provides information on income, but this time is actually showing income from our activities. So our charity we're looking at does actually have 6 different types of activities, but you can see we've actually got an income from here, income from charitable activities, which is just one of those activities, educational classes. So we've got that analysis of income by activity, and that's broken down by restricted funds and unrestricted funds. And on the expenditure side of things, again, feeding through from our sort of slide we just looked at, you can see in terms of expenditure on charitable activities, I've highlighted expenditure by activity, and I've just sort of shown 3 of the rows in different colours. Our activity has 6 different, our charity, sorry, has 6 different activities. And you can see, look, for the first row where we have expenditure on educational classes, one of our activities, again, it's broken down by fund type. As his fund days, our second activity, again, it's broken down by fund type if you look at the green row. And similarly, the blue row, adventure days, again, that expenditure is actually broken down by fund type. But going to the next note, note number 10, we have a slightly different analysis. So again, that expenditure is actually in note 10 broken down by direct costs or support costs. And again, I've actually highlighted those 3 different rows to actually sort of like show that different analysis. But if you look at the second part of note number 10, it's not highlighted there, but you can see if you actually look at the rows available, we do have an analysis of our expenditure, in this case, our direct cost expenditure by different expenditure types. So that's actually quite specific. We actually have staff costs, expenditure type 1, governance costs. So you can sort of see there's lots of additional information, including your set of financial statements, and the mapping numbers need to accommodate that. So, going back to my PowerPoint slide, so just bear with me a sort of second. I've said what needs to be disclosed and actually had a look at that. And what I'm actually going to do now is actually go and explain how the map numbers for the K map numbers and Y map numbers actually work. And what I'm actually sort of saying is actually sort of a range of numbers for the K section where we actually look at income. We can start off with K1. For voluntary income, and as you can see, it goes all the way down to K7, where you actually have income from any joint ventures your charity academy might have. And on the Y side of things, similar sort of thing, you've got a range of map numbers starting off with Y1, which is the cost of generating voluntary income, all the way down to Y9. So those first 2 digits give you a lot of options in terms of actually describing the actual type of income and type of expenditure. As we drill down those map numbers, you do actually get additional information in the mapping structure, but the mapping structure does actually vary depending on whether you're using sort of K1 or perhaps K7. But what I'm actually going to sort of say is that what I'm going to focus on is the format for the most commonly used map numbers. So if you actually have income from charitable activities where we use K2 map numbers, or if you have direct costs or support costs where we're looking at Y6 or Y7 map numbers, this is a hierarchy I'm actually going to focus on now. Now, if we look at those mapping numbers, I'm just going to use income from charitable activities as an example. I've mentioned that income from charitable activities would be K2 map numbers. If we look at the next element, that 3rd digit in the mapping hierarchy, which is actually the digit shown in red, you can see that that 3rd digit identifies different types of activities. So we have the option to record up to 12 different types of activities. K21 to K29 indicate activities 1 to 9. And as you saw in our charity file, we have 6 different activities. So we, in our case, would use K21 to K26. 12 options are available, so as well as K21 to K29, you can also use K2A and up to K2C for activities of 10 to 12. Drill down again, and we need to identify income and expenditure by specific type, and that's actually shown in blue in this slide. So it's actually the next level, level 2, shown in blue. And if, for example, you have income from sort of say fees, if you run educational classes, you might use income type 1. If there's perhaps some other sort of charge you make, you might use O2 for income type 2. But in essence, it's it's the blue element, that sort of second pair of numbers, which actually identify the different income types. And obviously on the Y map numbers, that 3rd element would actually identify the different types of expenditure. Drill down again, and as I mentioned, that 3rd element in most cases is always going to be 0, 0. So we're just going to look at the last element, which is actually the element shown in green. And that last pair of numbers just to identify whether the income expenditure is actually going into a restricted fund or a general or unrestricted fund. In essence, if you have endowment funds, you'll be using O1 as the last pair of numbers. It's in your K and Y map number range. Restricted funds will be using 02 or 05, or unrestricted funds will be using 03 and 04. And 03 will be designated funds and 04 will be general funds. So you can see as we drill down the map numbers, particularly for K2, Y6 and Y7, we have that further level of details. And again, I've sort of perhaps overwhelmed you slightly with those map number descriptions. If we have a look at that and how it actually works as an example, I've gone to the note we actually looked at earlier, that note on charitable activities. As we're looking at income from charitable activities, if we look at that one specific line that's actually showing, that line is picking up K2 map numbers, and as educational classes was our activity number 1, that line specifically is actually looking at K21 map numbers, because that's our income from charitable activities, activity number 1, which is educational classes. If we look at the columns involved on the right-hand side, where we have income going into unrestricted funds, if you look specifically at the last element, that 4th pair of numbers, that will actually be using map numbers 03 or 04. And whereas if we're looking at income going into an unrestricted funds, that last element looking at map numbers would be either 01 for endowment funds or 02, 05 for other restricted funds, basically. So again, that's a PowerPoint slide to actually show how that actually operates. And again, I'm just going to go to my Caseware file to actually show how that specifically works. And so I've gone back to Caseware, and in Caseware you can see I actually have this account code here, FW001, which is actually sort of fees we've actually charged in this charity for our educational classes. So that's actually sort of like income from charitable activities, and you can see the balance on it is around about that £47 million. So again, to actually show how it's actually mapped, if I open up my assigned mapping screens, as it's income from charitable activities, I want to map it to the K2 section, and as specifically is actually income from educational classes, which is actually number 1, I want to put it to that K21 section. Drill down again, and as our income is actually fees, and our fees is actually income type 01, I would have put it to K21.01, and if I just expand that section up and drill down to the final element, we said that that £47 million worth of fees is actually going into our general funds. So in terms of the mapping structure we would actually use, and the K21.01, if we just ignore the 3rd element, we want to use the map number ending with 04 to actually indicate the income is actually going into our general fund. And if I just expand that section up, you can sort of see that that account code we actually looked at is actually contained in that map number. So again, just to finish off the story, if I go back to my Caseware file and actually have a look at our note on income from charitable activities, as you can see that fees 001 account code is actually fed through into this note, and income from charitable activities and educational classes, and it would be included within that sort of £50 million worth of income going into unrestricted funds, and obviously the balance there would actually be other account codes. So that's how income and expenditure works on the sort of like the K and Y map numbers. Now, if I just quickly go back to my Caseware file and that assigned mapping screen, what you might have noticed if you look at this K21 section is that K21 map number range, the actual map number ranges reflects the activity in this specific organisation. So K21 is actually showing as educational classes. If I scroll down, we've got Children Funds Days, K22, and also Adventure Days, K23, whereas other elements of the mapping numbers are actually sort of showing fairly sort of generic sort of descriptions. So I think if you look at sort of K27, it just says activity sort of 7, income, just a general income sort of type 1. We can, if we want, actually sort of like rename these map numbers using options available in the wizard to actually sort of like make the map numbers just meaningful, which is what we've actually done in this case for some specific classes, and I'll actually have a look at in a minute. But before we actually sort of do that, I actually want to hand back to sort of Georgie, because just to make the sort of like webinar a little bit more interactive, we've actually just decided to actually ask you another poll just to show trying to find out a little bit more about how you actually use your Caseware files. So at this point, I'll hand you back to Georgie for a second poll.
Perfect, thanks Les. Yep, so the poll that we've got now is just to find out if you produce charity or academy accounts, or if indeed you produce both. So I'll just give you a short moment just to answer that for me. Perfect, thank you. So we've got 50, oh, it's jumping around, 48% charity, we've got 20% academy, and we've got 32 that produce both. Brilliant, thank you for that. That brings me nicely onto a question we've just received, Les, if you don't mind answering that, please. The question is, why is the same mapping used for both academies and charities?
It's a little bit of a technical question. That's actually probably sort of quite a good question. Obviously, the thing to point out is academies aren't actually charities. They're not actually registered charities. They don't abide by sort of charity commission rules. They've actually got their own sort of set of rules, the Academy Accounts directives. But they do actually have a sort of charitable purpose. And as organisations with a charitable purpose, the actual financial statements do actually sort of bear some similarity and quite a lot of resemblance to actually sort of specific charities governed by charity legislation. And because the actual disclosures in the Academy file are sort of so similar to the actual sort of charity sort of disclosures, we can actually use a sort of same mapping hierarchy to actually sort of provide it the disclosures in both types of organisations, even if the governing rules are actually sort of like quite sort of separately sort of governed and managed, basically. Which brings me nicely on to perhaps the sort of next element I actually want to do. As people here either use charities and academies, or perhaps a bit of both, this template has focused on a sort of charity file so far, and I did actually sort of say that one of the things we'd do is actually look at the options to actually sort of like change the actual mapping structure in a wizard. So as people here, significant number of you do actually use academy files as well as charity files. I've actually gone to an academy set of accounts, so you can actually sort of see the wizard of an academy set of accounts in front of you. And I've actually gone to the general information part of the wizard, and specifically in that general information part, I've actually gone to this funds tab. Now, this funds tab does actually provide a lot of options. And if I just quickly go to the Caseware file, Caseware working papers file in this organisation, rather than the actual Caseware document, if I open up the assigned mapping screens, and in that assigned mapping screens, if I go to perhaps the sort of K2 section, you can sort of see that that K2 section, as we saw in the previous file, but in certain sections, that K2 section actually has sort of the generic mapping descriptions there. Now, as I said, if I just go back to my Caseware file, case view file, and actually look at the wizard element, there are options here to actually sort of like change the mapping descriptions. And we have two options available. So where we have different activities, you can see this academy actually has one activity. We can change the actual map descriptions to actually reflect that activity, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. But also you can actually have the option to actually reflect the different types of specific income and expenditure. And you can sort of see that's actually been identified in this second element in this part of the wizard. I'm just going to look on the first part, because this process where we're looking at income and expenditure types can be done quite easy, but does actually take a bit of time. But you can see where we have different activities here. If I, in this part of the wizard, click on the button where it says set map code descriptions, that will rename the mapping hierarchy in this specific Caseware file. So it doesn't actually sort of take too long. It's actually been completed. As I said, the income and expenditure side of things does take a bit longer. But if I actually go back to my Caseware file for this academy and open up the assigned mapping screens, whereas before we actually have sort of fairly generic wording, if I look at the K2 section again, If we look specifically at K21, which is activity number 1, the mapping hierarchy there has been renamed to be specific for this one particular case study. So that's how the wizard can actually help you in terms of using the mapping functionality in your Charity and Academy file. One other point to flag up in this part of the wizard, if I just quickly go back to the wizard, I mentioned that some information in your set of accounts doesn't actually feed through the mapping hierarchy, it feeds through a document called the Funds Analysis Worksheet, and you can see in this part of the wizard we have this option here to open up that Funds Analysis Worksheet. So I say we will explore that in a future webinar. But that really concludes it for this webinar. I hope you sort of got something from the webinar. As a reminder, if you do want to sort of like raise any last minute questions, then please feel free to do so using the control panel that is actually available in front of you. But at this point, I'll just hand you back to Georgie to actually sort of provide the conclusion, but thank you very much for listening.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Les, and thank you to those that have sent a question. Please feel free to carry on logging them and we will get back to you either later today or Monday morning. We'll also look to include them into a Q&A document as well. We do have just sort of a few moments now. So we've got one come in, Les. You have looked at K and Y codes, but how do JMap numbers work?
Good question. I sort of focus on K and Y map numbers because they'll be ones that I would suspect you're going to be using mostly. But you do have the option, if your organisation does actually have any sort of training activities, to actually use those JMap numbers. So perhaps at this point, I'll just quickly go back into my Caseware file. So again, just bear with me just for a sort of minute or two or second or so. And I've gone back into my charity Caseware file, so the Ashmore Trust, the one we've actually been focusing on. And as has been flagged up, you can actually sort of see we do have the options to actually use these JMap numbers if your charity does actually have any sort of training activities. Hierarchy is slightly different, but similar in principle to the K and Y map numbers. You can see if you look at the mapping number here in the my assigned mapping screen, you can see we have this mapping range here, N1 for training accounts number 1. If you have more than one, you can use N2 or N3 or so on, according to how many training accounts you actually have. But within the N1 section, you can sort of see we have N11, which represents your trading income. Alternatively, on the expenditure side of things, we have N12 to N15, N14 to represent your sort of cost of sales, so purchasing, opening and closing stocks. And in terms of other expenditure, we actually have this N15 map number range, which I'll just drill down to show you quickly. Where you have any sort of trading expenses such as wages and salaries and national insurance, you can see we actually have N1580 and so on. But in terms of general trading expenses, if I open up this N15.01 section and drill down to show the complete mapping structure, you can see where we have different trading expenses. You can use N15 and the map numbers using ending in 01 all the way out to 15 to actually represent those different trading expenses you might occur within your charity. So that's how the map numbers actually work within the sort of trading account JMap number range. And at that point, I'll just go back to my PowerPoint slide and I'll again just hand you back over to Georgie.
Perfect. Thanks, Les, and thanks to those who have logged a question. If we look ahead at our upcoming webinars, you can see the agendas for all of our webinars and also register for them over on the events page of our website. So that concludes today's webinar. Thank you very much for your time today. We do hope you enjoyed it. Please take the time at the end of the webinar to complete the feedback form. We would really appreciate it. And if you have any ideas for future content, then please do let us know. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.